Hi, welcome to episode 84 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we all live in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whitten, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Pat Keane, who lives about 115 miles northeast of me in the Suffield, Connecticut area. Pat and I go back a long way to when we were junior officers on USS Bunker Hill, home ported in Yokosuka, Japan, starting in 1994. Pat, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you doing? And could you share a bit of your story?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks for having me on. For your listeners, I guess I'm a product of Connecticut. I was born and raised in Waterford, Connecticut. I live now in Suffield, Connecticut. But I spent my formative years, like you, in the U.S. military and the Navy, kind of growing and learning. I left the military and had kind of a strange career in different business roles here and there, which kind of culminated in a real estate job where I ran a company for a guy named Harold Grinspoon for about 20 years. And I recently, about a year ago, retired from that. And currently, my wife, Susi, and I run a foundation where we do development work in Tanzania. So a little bit of a hodgepodge. But.
Yeah, wow. So many different tangents we can go on. I guess why don't we start with, growing up in Connecticut? Did you think about staying closer by? Did you always, you went to the academy, the Naval Academy? Did you always know you wanted to do that? Did you think you wanted to get away from where you grew up, just have some new experience? What was the story there?
Yeah, it's funny. I think Connecticut's a weird state, and it's kind of like, small and kind of forgotten, and it's kind of bookended by these two huge metros, right? You got New York on one side and Boston on the other. And the story I always tell about Connecticut, and this is a true story, when I was a kid, we had a merry-go-round on the campus at our primary school, and all the New York Yankee fans would push it one way, and all the Boston Red Sox fans would push it the other way. And that merry-go-round for the whole year would not move; it would just sit there because there was always an equal number of Yankee and Red Sox fans. And so Connecticut's a little bit like that. It's really driven by those two big metros on either side of us. And I guess I didn't appreciate it as much when I was growing up here. But yeah, when I went away and joined the military and was away from it, I did kind of feel a pull to come back here and kind of raise my family here. So that's my connection to Connecticut. As far as, why I left in the first place and joined the military, it was really more economic. My family was, we was 7 of us, so we didn't have college money for all of us. So I had no college money, and I ended up getting accepted to the U.S. Naval Academy. So it was kind of a free education. And that's what kind of got me into the military. And then, you saw the rest of my career. I was mostly with you, sailing around on the Bunker Hill.
Yeah. When you got to the academy, what was it? Did you, I guess, because you grew up in Connecticut, I don't know how much exposure you got to the rest of the area, much less the country. My family didn't really travel that much. So going to even Philadelphia was eye-opening. What was it like for you? Not as far as the military experience at the academy, but just kind of like having that whole, I guess, the whole nation there really at the academy.
Yeah, I think it was like the best part of it for me. The joke we had in my room, because I was from Connecticut, and so I talk kind of fast, like a little bit like a New Yorker. And my other roommate, great guy, his name Martin Howell, he was from Thibodaux, Louisiana, and he spoke really slow, and literally the two of us could barely communicate. So the joke was that Spencer Johnson, who was our third roommate, who was from Virginia, was halfway. Like he would basically be the interpreter between my fast speech and Martin's like Thibodaux drawl. But that was a great part about it. So to the tributaries piece of this, like it was, I think the military does a great job of blending, kind of the American experience and kind of putting all those different pieces together and making them focus on a mission. And I think that's why it's a good organization, a powerful organization, because it takes all those people to kind of make it work.
Yeah,
I definitely felt that at the academy and in the Navy.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, just the same thing in the fleet itself, right? Like that's you were there with me, so how blended and how diverse a ship's company can be, and it's what makes it work sometimes.
Yeah, well, to me, what I think back to the experience in the Navy, I think even more so than in like the Army or the Air Force, or the Marine Corps, like for the Navy, the surface fleet, that experience of being on a ship is really like you are really a floating town, and I think it highlights like no other that kind of interconnectedness and interdependence. And that was one of the things that I draw from in kind of doing this, is because of that interconnected independence, and realizing that, the captain that could be in for 40 years is dependent on the most junior sailor that just shows up, because if that guy needs to be trained, he needs to be respected, and not necessarily people aren't doing it. It's not a perfect organization, but it's really highlighted there how much we all need each other. And I think I remember, frankly, like listening to Rush Limbaugh on like the whatever the armed forces like radio was when we were in Japan, but like I don't. But I also remember when Bill Clinton showed up. I mean, I was excited to kind of see him on the Independence, and it never felt like politics was like an overriding facet of it. It was just one element of people, but the getting the job done, was the most important thing by far, and just kind of that shared experience.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the mission kind of drove it and kind of kept us all focused, and the diversity, almost added to as opposed to taking away. I'm
Yeah.
curious what it's like now, because I think you and I were in the Navy before social media, before kind of the divisiveness in the country, and I wonder if the military's still seeing that, or is still inoculated from that a little bit because of the shared mission. But for me, it was all positive experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when we came of age, there was other parts that was complicating the mission, but I think that was also just kind of a part of like the larger transformation of the American workforce
Right.
that impacted us. So when you get to the academy, what was it? I guess like I don't know if stereotypical is the right word, but the kind of the quintessential like, is it? I'm sorry, but when
Sleep
you first
summer, yeah,
started, it's plebe. So was
yeah.
it the classic? And did you have any second thoughts like when that started, where you're like, what the heck am I doing?
Um, the physical stuff and the plebe summer stuff didn't bother me because I kind of knew it was coming. I mean, you're going to do push-ups. You're going to get yelled at. You're going to get your head shaved and all that stuff. So I kind of took that in stride. Um, I ended up liking the part I liked about the academy was um, it was very meritocracy, right? Like everything was graded, you knew where you stood, your class rank was always on the wall. Like you could work hard and see yourself move up or move down, or you could kind of, it felt fair.
Hmm.
So I like that part of it. I had a moment. There was one point where I was like a little bit upset with the academics, and I thought maybe I should be somewhere else, and I ended up applying to other schools and thinking about a transfer, but. I stayed, and I'm glad I did. And I think it was more the overall experience of, you know the camaraderie, the team, the guys I met, the girls I met, those connections is what helped. And then I think it kind of catapulted me quickly into leadership and running people and running teams and all that. I don't know if I'd gotten the same experience anywhere else.
Yeah. No, from I don't know what you saw in your experience in the corporate world, in the civilian world, but like one of the things I think is really lacking is there. I mean, I don't even know how good the management is in like the corporate world, but I think that there's really the idea of leadership seems to be a rare trait.
Mhm.
And I don't know why that is, but I think that when in the military, like I think to me, one of the things that you kind of get maybe just kind of expect, oh, you can become an officer, people just do what you say. And I think you realize like that's not at all what leadership is, and that's not at all how you're going to get stuff done. You really do have to inspire people to kind of do the right thing, and you obviously have to give them the tools to do it and the structure around which to do it. But it was so much more. And I think that the military is one of the few places that really teaches you, leadership.
Yeah, and I think teaching it and being able to do it is really the key, right? Like I'm teaching my kids how to drive right now, and what you realize is nobody's a good driver. Like nobody's a good driver when they start. You have to actually drive in order to become a good driver. And I think leadership's the same way. People bemoan like the lack of corporate leadership, or there's no good corporate leaders. Or well, the fact is nobody's a good leader to start, right? Like you have to
Right.
kind of fail, and you have to be in an organization that allows you to have a group of 15 people and go mess it up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like mine was the electrical division. You know,
Mm,
I got these 15 grown men reporting to me. I'm right out of college. I was a terrible leader,
mm.
right? And I'm still learning how to be a leader, but I think I got better as I went. And so by the time I got into the corporate world, I had at least, 5 or 10 years of experience leading teams and, like you said, motivating people and driving, outcomes. And so that I credit the Navy with giving me that chance to kind of be terrible at it for a few years.
And what I guess what were some of the things that I guess you learned about leadership? Like, what does leadership mean to you, and what's effective leadership?
Yeah, I'm big in the Simon Sinek, like servant leader stuff. Like, like the people who are working for you have a job and you have a job and your job is to make them effective and make sure there's no roadblocks. And so you have to think about your job and how you serve them. And they have to think about their jobs and how they execute it, efficiently. And so if, in a good team, those roles are clear and nobody's kind of bucking it. And I think, when you can get that situation going, it's virtuous and everybody's good. Um, I've been in toxic places too, but that's kind of what I shoot for.
Yeah. Um. So when you got out of the Navy, did you go? I know you went to business school as well, but what did you start off working and then went to school? Or what happened after?
Yeah, I got out. I got out and got married. That was my first big transition. Susie and I
Yeah.
got married as soon as I left, or right as I was leaving, and started having kids. I did jump into the business world right away. I got a job in Silicon Valley at a medical device company, and it was a great job. But I didn't feel like as set up for success in the business world because I didn't understand, financial terms and balance sheets and spreadsheets and stuff like that. So I ended up getting my master's degree in business from Duke, but I did it on the weekends and at night, kind of like a weekend executive program,
Oh wow.
while I was kind of working full time. And that was good because I think it helped me transition from, an ex-military person with some leadership, experience to a more well-rounded business person.
Mhm.
And from there, I moved into the real estate gig, and that's kind of how I made my mark. But it was a little bit of a transition going from one culture, the military, to a business culture,
Yeah.
and I wasn't immediately successful for sure.
Were you living in North Carolina then?
California first, then we moved to North Carolina. That's where I got my degree,
Okay.
and then eventually back to Connecticut, which Susie is a trooper because she did all those moves. Oh, including a stop in Kansas. I forgot about that. We lived
What brought you to Kansas?
A job. Yeah, I was
Uh,
working. I was finishing my degree and working for a company that had put me there to start a concrete plant out in Kansas City, Kansas.
wow.
So yeah,
All
we did
right.
a little bit of everything.
um, to go back, because I was thinking about all your travels with different places you lived in the country, but when you were coming out of the academy, why? I mean, the temptations I think for a lot of us is like San Diego seems really attractive, or Mayport, Florida, Virginia. There's Norfolk. There's plenty of more alluring places, and to
Mhm.
go so far overseas is something that I think a lot of people don't will shy away from. What made you so, I guess, curious about going to Japan?
Yeah, for me it was actually the ship. So the way that works at the Naval Academy is when you graduate, based on your class rank, you get to pick your service, and then if you pick surface, which you and I did, you get to pick your ship. And the first guy has all the ships that are available. You pick one, and the next guy can pick everything except for the one the first guy took, and it just kind of goes down the road. So when I got there, into this room, and there was every ship in the Navy that had an opening was kind of available to me, and I grabbed the Bunker Hill because it had a reputation for having like the coolest mission and the best technology at the time, which is kind of laughable now, but
Yeah.
at the time it was super cool, and I wanted to be like kind of on that cutting edge. Um, and I was single, and I wanted the whole Navy, like explore the world experience, and so Japan was a draw,
Mm,
but the ship and its mission was a big draw too.
yeah. I think of the cutting edge technology, like, remember when GPS was like a top secret thing?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we do briefs with like, well, look, we can enter a port and we can like plot it on the computer.
Yeah. And now everybody does that like
Yeah,
all the time, and
on their
then
phone.
complains when they're like they're not exactly where they're supposed to be on the map.
Yeah, no, I do remember. I don't know if you remember this. We were coming back from Hawaii, and the captain turned the electronics off, and we had to navigate by paper and stars for like a couple days. Do you remember that?
I vaguely, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it was. I think it was Jordy who was our navigator who was the most like perplexed and put out by that because suddenly he had to like remember how to like shoot a star fix or something
Oh
like
my
that. God help us.
it's one thing when you do it in a classroom. It's another thing when you've got $1 billion warship with like 400 guys on it,
Yeah,
depending
you're out
on
in the
you
middle
do
of
it
the
right.
ocean going, I think it's that way.
is, is that why we did that detour to Australia?
Yeah. Oops. Okay.
So, um, so I guess so you were you had been in various places, and you do boomerang back to Connecticut.
Yeah.
Was that some? Did you want to? Was that something that you like had wanted to do? And I know you mentioned a little bit about what brought you
Yeah. Like I
back, but
said, I
any
didn't
more?
think I wanted it, but I eventually appreciated it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a connection through a Naval Academy friend got me a job here. That's how I ended up back here. But it did kind of allow me to finally like put down roots and set up a home and put my kids in a school that I knew they would stay in. And so like once I got deep into this community, Suffield, Connecticut, I really appreciated it. And it was close to where I'd grown up, so I think it was easy for me. Interestingly, my wife Susie, who's from the West Coast, she's amazing and she has great friends and she has deep roots here now as well. But it's weird for her that our kids think of themselves as from Connecticut because she's from Washington, so it just doesn't compute to her.
Yeah.
But it's the community here has been good to us. So, how
Is
about
it a
you with
big
Brooklyn?
thing?
Are you the same with Brooklyn? I wouldn't have put you there, but you ended up there after the Navy. How did that happen?
It was Christy applied to business schools, and we got into NYU was the most attractive, and then we lived in Manhattan for a few years. We got an opportunity to get rent under $1,000, which in like
Wow.
even back then was very enticing.
Yeah.
So we grabbed that apartment in Brooklyn, and we've been here since 2000. So I mean, we've seen it change a lot, and I think for me, I liked I like the I guess the variety of things that are around, and I think that I'm actually pretty introverted, so I think having so many people around kind of forces me to be more of an extrovert. So it's worked, and like once you have the kids, I think past a certain age, if you've figured it out that far, then they start having their own friends, and it becomes even like more like almost unfathomable to pick them up and leave for anything
Hmm.
other than like if a new job kind of pulls you away.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that's I think there's the I don't know like what people see in the news about New York City, and then like the reality is like we live in a great neighborhood and kids
Mhm.
have lots of friends, we have friends, and it's been great. So I mean we're now on the tail end. You have two, right? Two kids?
Three. Yeah.
Three. So you have three like us, and our oldest is starting college,
Yeah.
Miranda. So like if we made it this far, like we're gonna get more space in our apartment by attrition.
There you go.
How about you? How old your three are?
Yeah, three. So my oldest just graduated Syracuse University on Sunday.
Oh
So
wow!
we were there for that. That was
Congratulations.
great. And then I have one as a junior at UVM, and my youngest is a sophomore
Okay.
in Farmington here by us.
Okay.
So
Wow.
yeah, it's good times. We're almost clear,
Yeah.
almost clear of tuition payments. Or we got one less tuition payment.
um so it's interesting how you describe Connecticut as almost defined by like this kind of transition place between
Mhm.
Boston and New York, but is there something because like where you are is kind of like central Connecticut, so
Yeah.
you are in the middle, but like is there something that you would say is quintessentially Connecticut versus Massachusetts?
Um, it's a good question. I mean, this particular town where I'm in has a definite vibe. It's actually a farming town, so it's very they actually raise tobacco here. So it's a farming town historically, going back to revolutionary times, and so it has that old school farming town feel. With the historic center and all that. So I think people from Suffield think of themselves as farmers. The strange dichotomy here is you have, these farms are slowly turning into suburbia. So you have all these new people who come in, like myself with kids, and so you have this old farming community put up beside this newer, younger, um, suburban community. So that's kind of the flavor here
Hmm.
in this particular town. And then I think other parts of Connecticut are different. The parts of Connecticut that are down by the New York Metro, like the Gold Coast, I mean, they're basically, suburbs of New York,
Hmm.
where up here in central Connecticut, it definitely feels like its own thing.
Hmm.
Um, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I tried to get down to Brooklyn to do this podcast, but you don't have the tech for that.
Yes.
But I definitely want you and Christy to come up here and check it out.
Yeah.
It's nice up here.
No, that would be, and I think there is something about like I think when you're in New England, there's something there. It definitely has a certain feel to it. I don't know that I could distinguish between like Connecticut and Massachusetts,
Yeah.
but there is kind of a comfort. There's a history there. There's a comfortableness and a
Hmm.
tradition that you go other places, you don't feel it. But that's the I guess the beauty of like the United States is like, when you travel geographically, you're also traveling almost in time, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
you're here on the East Coast and you've got places that have 400 years of history, and you go west and you could be in a town that has 10 years of history.
Yeah. And I travel a lot with work, and I always see it in the growth too, right? Like in Connecticut or most of New England, like it's pretty staid and static, right? Like things don't change much,
Yeah.
and that has its own comfort, and people like that. So I think people in New England like being kind of curmudgeon-y or kind of like settled and kind of historical. You go to I go to Atlanta all the time. I mean, there's new buildings thrown up. There's a crane next door. One will be ripped down, a new one will go. Same thing in Florida. So you see other parts of the country that are much more dynamic and kind of moving all the time.
Yeah.
Um, I, you definitely, like you said, when you travel, you can feel it.
Yeah. Well, I actually had a friend who made a very interesting comment because they had lived in a couple of different parts of the country, and they're now in outside Boston, and they had said that Boston is actually the most unwelcoming, with the area where they were in a suburb of Boston, but it was the most unwelcoming, and not necessarily because of what people are doing, but also just because of like the history and the tradition. Like you had people who had summer homes for generations, and they go visit those, and it was a little bit harder to penetrate the community than in
Hmm.
other parts because
Yeah,
of that tradition.
no doubt. Like the joke here in Suffield, where I live in Connecticut, is similar to that. Is I've been here for 20 years now, and I still can't call myself a resident because like there's like third generation farming families here who
uh,
like we're just all newcomers to them.
That's so funny. That's funny because and this is where, like, as I've talked to people from different parts of the country, where I've heard that, I noticed that when I was talking with people in South Carolina, like, because I was like, oh, can I talk to you, or you have some advice? I think it was for planning my American trips down there, and
Mhm.
somebody who'd been living there for 25 years, and I'm like, do you have any recommendations as a South Carolinian? And they're like, oh, you want a South Carolinian? Like I can connect you with somebody, but I'm not a South Carolinian. Like you've been there for 25 years. Like if you're not that, what are you?
Yeah, no,
But it's funny that two different areas, yeah, it's
yeah,
still that same sense of tradition.
yeah. I do like that though. Like what I like less is what I call anywhere USA. When you go to like I don't want to bag Florida again, but parts of Florida where it's just strip mall after strip mall. It's the same restaurants over and over, the same corporate stores over and over. You don't ever get a sense of place. Where I think where New England and South Carolina and some of these more traditional communities, you get that sense of place and that sense of history and yeah, some of that sometimes that comes with secularism and isolate and maybe a little bit of us versus them. That's what your friend was feeling in outskirts of Boston, but
Hmm.
it's how you get unique places somehow
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well, but I guess like what you're alluding to is like, to for there to be something interesting, there does have to be some kind of, I mean, it's, if we all just are homogenized,
Mhm.
then you lose anything interesting. So you really
Right.
almost have to allow those differences. But I guess like maybe there needs to be awareness of being welcoming.
Yeah.
Because like there's and it's hard to do both, but maybe that's kind of something we need to just embrace more. Is like, yeah, it is hard. That's
Yeah.
the way it is. Like
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
so,
People in San Francisco are going to have to let some Republicans move in sometimes, and people in Suffield are going to have to let like non-farmers live here.
yeah.
But
So you said you got to see like lots of the country. Was there any kind of insight? Actually, first, like, what were you doing in your real estate company, and like, what did you then learn about the country and all those travels?
yeah, so the company I was with was great. We did uh, it's kind of going to sound like yeoman's work, but apartment renovation. So we would buy struggling or problematic apartment communities usually 200 plus apartments, so big communities, and then we would renovate them and re-rent them, and either hold them or sell them. So that was kind of our business, was basically taking underperforming properties and kind of improving them, kind of like a turnaround situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it I think it gave me an appreciation for lots of things. One, just hard work. I mean, the people that work for us would move around the country and do this work. The company's called Aspen Square, and they were just amazing. They would, pick up at a moment's notice, go somewhere, live there for 2 years, do an incredible amount of work, totally repositioning these communities, and then go somewhere else. So the the teams that could do that were just super fun to work with. Um, the communities themselves was always interesting. Like, there's just something good about it before and after. You know what I mean? Like, being able to see something broken and fixing it is just a fun thing to do. Um, it it's sad in some respects. You see people that are underhoused or in terrible family situations, and it just, that that stuff is difficult, especially on low income properties. But I always felt like it was a product of more the economy and less of what I was doing, and I was just
Right.
there, painting it and fixing it.
Yeah. What is it? There kind of like a standard formula, but is there basic things that always kind of you have to do, and then are you doing? Like I had a guest a couple of episodes ago named Seth Kaplan who wrote this book about fragile neighborhoods, and he
Mm-hmm.
writes about that sense of community. And like one of the things I actually like about our building is we have like about 70 units,
Mm-hmm.
and like we've been here a while, and it takes time to build those relationships. But what's nice is that you can go into the backyard and it's easy to meet people because that walking by to go to to their car, or they're coming back from their car, and they might stop and talk with you for a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the feeling of community we have here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of factor into apartment building renovations?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you're in a good building, right? But the first thing that we always notice, so we're always coming into usually terrible situations like
Hmm.
apartment buildings that have been run down. So the first hurdle is always getting the current residents to believe like we're gonna improve things and not make it worse. Because if we're there, it means they've got mold in their kitchens, and they've
Oh
got
man.
pipes that leak, and they haven't got a maintenance guy responded in days or weeks. So the first thing we do is put really good top notch service in, because people need to believe, like, this has to be a compact. Like, you have to believe that I'm going to fix this thing, and the way I do that is by doing it, by actually showing up and fixing your sink and fixing it, right. So you got to get that, and then the other thing you need, I think, to have community is security, right? Like, you got to have a safe. You got to be able to go to your backyard, and you got to be able to go to your porch, and
Yeah.
and so to do that requires um, some tough work in, like, holding up regulations and not letting people get away with stuff, and you know. Moving out some bad actors who are maybe like not so good for the community. So that kind of work. Once you can create the security, create the trust, create the cooperation, then you get the virtuous cycle of people like to live there, and they have community, and they feel good and safe, and that's the compact. But
Yeah.
all that takes a little bit of a formula.
Yeah. And like were you like really all over the country, or were there certain areas that you spent most of your time?
Yeah, we would buy everywhere. So I've you name it, we were there. So I used to do about 200,000 miles a year on Delta.
Wow.
So domestic, all domestic. Yeah. So yeah, we would get around. I would say we were mostly like kind of in the Sun Belt. So kind of like, big in Florida, Atlanta, Texas, Vegas, like kind of that kind of area.
Hmm.
But, we would buy stuff in Iowa and Kansas City and Michigan.
Hmm.
I've been everywhere.
Were there any surprises, like any areas where you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting this, and
Um,
this was more than I expected, or
It's funny. I've always liked Kansas City for some reason. There's just people in Kansas are just nice. Like, they're just nicer than me. So it's always my stand. It's like, these people are really nice. So I do like the Midwest. Um, yeah, I liked everywhere I worked. Trying to think if there's any other standout places. Um, I liked, there's this little town in New York called Corning, New York, which I just kind of fell in love with. It's just a cute little town up on a lake
yeah,
that we got. I don't even know why we were up there. We found this random complex there, but that's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country.
yeah. So you put in your 2 decades of work and retire, and you start working again.
Yeah.
So can you talk about your the foundation?
Yeah. So I kind of knew it was coming. I mean, I knew I was kind of wrapping up my real estate career. And I had been traveling to Tanzania quite often with a project my father had originally started. And so I knew I was going to need something to keep me busy. So Susie and I started the foundation with the idea being we would raise money here in the States and invest it in partner organizations that are doing development work in this area of Tanzania called Rukwa. So the foundation is called the Rukwa Foundation. Um, and it's just kind of a grow where you're planted kind of thing. Because we were there and because we knew people, we were able to find partner organizations and teams that we trusted and could work with, and we thought we'd try our hand at raising money and doing that more
Hmm.
full time. When I left, I was also kind of encouraged in this. My former boss is a philanthropist. His name's Harold Grinspoon, and he kind of encouraged me to try this on for size and see if it was something I could be good at.
Hmm.
So that was nice to have a little bit of a mentor kind of pushing me that way, um, along
Yeah.
with my dad who had the original kind of ideas.
Yeah. Um. So I guess there. I've encountered this term of like, yeah, like I'll remove the color aspect of it, but like kind of like the savior complex.
Hmm.
So and it really and I to me I was thinking about like this question, and it's to me like the savior complex is really I think more important to think about it that way, because it's like it's not like a race thing, it's or a regional nationally, because it could be anywhere, right? Like you can want to help your neighbor, but if you don't understand their situation, you're not really doing anything. You might feel good doing it, but you want to actually have a lasting impact, which requires more a delicacy and I guess more nuance and more understanding. So, like, how do you go about what you're doing? Because I mean, Connecticut is not Tanzania, obviously, to
Hmm.
kind of make sure that you're, I guess, respecting what they do and being effective and what
And
and helping them with the
that's
way they want.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first I would start with my view of the people of Tanzania is amazing. Like they're just amazing people, right? Like they're everyone I meet over there. They're funny, they're smart, they're entrepreneurial, they're hardworking, and they're just amazing people. Um, but then you look and the only thing they're lacking is capital, right? They're just not as much development. There's not as much capital around. So part of why I started the foundation was thinking of the back to the servant leader kind of thing is like, all right, I have capital, at least I have access to capital, at least I can get access to capital. It's the one thing that I can bring to the situation. So so that was kind of the guiding principle of the organization. It's like we're not solving Tanzania's problems, we're just raising capital, because that's the only thing we can do.
Mhm.
And we try as best we can to be what we think of as partner led, right? Like we're not imposing solutions, we're not telling anybody what to do. We're again avoiding the savior complex kind of thing, trying to just find good local partners and partnering with them in the only way we can or the best way we can, which is providing them capital
Mhm.
grants, right? So that's the first thing is you got to be partner led. You got to listen to your partners and you got to kind of expect that they already know the solutions to their own problems, and you're not imposing new ones, hopefully.
Mhm.
But it's a fine line, and it's tricky. So that's one of it, is to kind of know your lane, like understand like you're the capital raiser and they're the solution provider, and just leave it like that. So we try to keep our grants um, fairly open, fairly unconstrained. Um, and then we do a lot of, one of our taglines is Bega Kwa Bega, which in Kiswahili means shoulder to shoulder.
Mhm.
So we visit often, we do capacity building, we help where we can, we provide the capital, we find new partners. So we try to avoid that by doing the work. Um,
Right.
and I will, the other thing I'll caution is I think a lot of people don't want to get into philanthropy, or like they use the savior complex as an excuse to do nothing.
Right.
Like, oh, I don't want to be seen as a white savior. I don't want to be. I don't want to annoy my friends. I don't want to. I don't know. For whatever reason, you can use those as an excuse to do nothing, and I think that's its own flaw.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd rather skirt the line of somebody canceling me for that and do good, or at least try.
Yeah.
I
No,
will
I mean,
last piece of this. We also are diversifying our board to get more local leaders on the board to driving
mhm,
it. So I think
mhm,
that's the other obvious like governance way to avoid making mistakes.
yeah. What kind of projects have you guys supported?
Um, we do we do a lot of water development. So we've given about 15,000 people access to clean water in this area that we work. We do a lot of education stuff. We do scholarships at a vocational trade school. We do. There's a huge need for healthcare workers in that part of the country, so we do scholarships for healthcare workers. Um, we do we started to do these village savings programs, which are these amazing where you give capital to a small group of usually women, and instead of spending it, they kind of lend it out to each other in these savings groups, and those are really powerful to kind of drive entrepreneurship and development. So it's a little bit of a hodgepodge, and again, it's usually driven by our partners. But those are the ones we brag about.
Wow. And how often do you go there?
At least once a year. Since I retired, it's been a little more active, like 2 or 3 times a year.
Uh,
I think I was last over in October, but we have visitors come this way too now, which is fun.
mhm. Oh, that's great. And then I guess like where in Tanzania? I know Tanzania that's what Kilimanjaro is, right?
Yeah,
And how big
yeah,
is Tanzania, like as a country? Like if you were to put it on the map of the United States?
yeah. It's huge. It's like bigger than Texas, so it's kind of like if you stuck it in the middle of the country, it would cover like Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma. Like it's big. Um, Maybe not Texas and Oklahoma, but anyway, it's big. Um, so the it's on the coast, so it's on the get my geography right. It's on it's on the east coast of Africa on the
Okay,
coast.
so
So the
Indian
coastal
Ocean.
regions, yeah, Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar are kind of pretty well developed, and that's where the bulk of the trade and economic impetus is. And then Kilimanjaro and the tourist trade is really up north. So the north of the country and the east of the country are fairly well developed because of tourism and trade. Rukwa is the far western part, so it's actually on Lake Tanganyika on the border with Congo. So it's kind of outside of the normal
Mhm.
trade routes and tourist spots. So that's where we are.
And one of the things when I think about like travel, one of the things that I've been trying to bear in mind is like when you visit a place, you're getting one exposure to it. But like if you come to New York City, you do all the touristy things. You've seen New York City, but you haven't really gotten to know the people of New York City.
Yeah.
And it seems like for you, you're really getting to know the people of Tanzania and working on this project versus just being like a tourist. But I guess do you feel like you're able to actually kind of really penetrate into the community to get to know the people, or is it more of kind of like a business relationship versus being part of the community?
Yeah, I'd say we have deep and lasting friends in Tanzania
Mm,
that we know and work with. So it does it. We don't feel like tourists there anymore, in that we have deep relationships and people we've known for years and like to
okay.
spend time with. I think there's a power dynamic in that we're a funding organization, so we come there and we do tend to get the dog and pony shows, and we get you know kind of best foot forward because they're looking for grant funding.
Mm,
Um, so to break from that sometimes is a little tricky,
right.
but you can do it with time and just with consistency and
Yeah.
follow up. So that's how we work on that.
And I found like for me, when I visit like wineries, it's not the same, but there is a certain dog and pony show when if you're working for an importer and you go visit the wineries. And for me, I always felt like I just would made sure that I try to look around and notice things that they're not paying attention to kind of see, because that's like the unguarded parts of it, or where you get to kind of like know who you're really dealing with,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
it's easy to
there's no
put polish.
substitute for leadership by walking around, right? You just got to be
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly.
So that's helped us. Yeah, so we're trying.
Okay. And where would you want your foundation to be like in 10 years?
I think what the parts I love is the grant making, the visiting Tanzania, and the development work. The parts I absolutely hate is the fundraising and the capacity building on this side, and I find that that's where I'm falling down, and that's where like my organization needs to get stronger.
Mm,
So we're going to spend this next year focused on that, like getting our social media game kind of picked up, our marketing communications improved. Um, so we have work to do to be the type of organizations that large donors would give to.
mm,
And then we want to kind of grow outside of our friends and family kind of donation circle. So that's kind of on track for the next 2 to 3 years. Ultimately, we want a presence in the country full time. Right now, we're working through partners and visits, and so we spend a lot of money on consultants and things that we would rather have our own employees do.
right.
So we'd like to get to a point where we could have full time presence there, and a more consistent funding basis here. So
Mm.
that's what we're
And
heading.
what's the food like?
The food, it's good in that it's healthy and clean, right? Like you eat a lot of chicken and you eat a lot of ugali, which is like it's like a porridge, but it's like their staple, like rice. Um, it's funny though I always joke about when you eat a Tanzanian chicken, like you taste like actual chicken. I think if they ate a chicken here, they wouldn't know what it was because it's like they're totally unrecognizable as far as
what does real chicken taste like, or
stringy and
unindustrialized?
like tastes like, yeah, it tastes like a bird, right? It tastes like
Uh,
muscle and stringy as opposed to like, you get like a white breast meat chicken from the US, like the roasters from Costco.
yeah,
I mean, they're just pumped up with whatever.
yeah,
Uh, they're tasty, but they're not the same food.
yeah. And so, if you were to give somebody from Tanzania visiting you a what you would consider quintessential Connecticut dish meal, what would that be?
It's funny. We just had that experience because our friend Carolyn Conducey, who's our board member, was visiting, and she stayed with Susie and I for a week. Um, we what did we do? I'm trying to think of the stuff we did that was different or new for her. Um, things like asparagus and like dishes that are kind of like hybrid of maybe Asian dishes and Italian that we kind of get because we're around it. Their 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 diet is more staples, right? It's like chicken, beans, rice, you know, and whatever vegetables in season. That's what they eat, and we luckily have access to everything all the time. So we kind of broadened our palate a little bit, but
Hmm.
it's fun. It's funny. The other story we have is we took our friends from Tanzania to an Italian restaurant in Arusha, and they were just like they hated it. They were like, "This is like, okay, give me the where's the ugali, where's the chicken?" So
What was it that they didn't like?
it was just odd to them.
Uh
It was just like too odd, and the pizza was too hot. Like they burned their tongue. It was like
uh
good flat like New York style Neapolitan pizza,
uh
but it was too hot, and they were just like, "Why would anyone eat?"
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
strange.
Wow. um Now, honestly, like for me, and my career is the kind of different trajectory than yours, but when I think back to really like I guess the life that I've lived, I look back and I think that definitely had my head too um maybe I had blinders on to, like, I guess, my obligations to do something to help the community, to do something like good that was beyond me and my family. And I think it's natural in many respects. Like, we all, like, it's enough to just try to get a job and hold down a relationship and raise a family. Um but I think I don't know if I would have chosen a different, like, when I started being a lawyer, it became an all consuming job. So you really don't have time to do anything that would be meaningful without maybe even risking your job. um but do you think that there's something, like, so in ways, like, what I'm doing, I feel like, is making up for what I didn't do for the last 30 plus years?
Mhm.
Um, do you have you been able to kind of do stuff like this, like, during your career, during your all your time since the Navy?
No, I think I wish I had. What you're describing, I call it like the productivity trap. Like you feel like you have to be productive all the time. And if you're not being
Yeah,
productive, you're useless, especially as like, a provider for your family, right? So
yeah.
so you grind it out in the junior legal person, or for me it was a business guy. And that all consuming hamster wheel like will suck all your energy and all your time. so I don't think I was good at making that balance through most of my career.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I think this mentor I mentioned, Harold Grinspoon. He always was like he was always really good at doing philanthropy and doing stuff on the side while he ran his businesses, and he just made that part of his life. And so he encouraged me to do that. So I started the Rukwa Foundation while I was still working, and he kind of allowed that. So I
Hmm.
think having somebody who allowed it was a benefit that I had along the way.
Yeah.
Um, we Yeah, I think it does take a little bit of time and a little bit of commitment to do it full time or to But I think, I mean, anybody can have impact around them. You don't have to go to Tanzania to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like you could foster a kid, you could help out the local kitchen, you could work in a diversity workshop. I don't know. I mean, you name it, whatever gets
Yeah.
you going. Like those things have value, and and just because they're not productive doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and even like for me, when I think about, our neighborhood is like, there's even parks that could use volunteers. So I think it's more that idea of being a part of something. I mean, it's unproductive because it doesn't bring you income, but it's productive for your community.
Yeah.
And I think I hope that my kids, when they go off into the world, have seen
Mhm.
what I'm doing and kind of have that incorporated into their lives.
Mhm.
At an earlier part than as opposed to when they turn like 50, like I did, or feel like,
Yeah.
oh, I should do something.
Yeah. I know you always try to end these with like what gives you hope, and I'm not trying to get my answer going, but one of the things that gives me hope is that generation, like your daughter, my daughter, like people make fun of them, because they're idealistic and they're all that, but I think they are truly committed to trying to improve things and make things better,
Yeah,
and they don't seem to be as fixated on the almighty dollar as maybe I was for sure. I won't
yeah,
speak for you, but so I think that could be a good force for change in the world.
yeah. No, I think that's true, and I,
We'll see
and
if that
I
holds up once they have mortgages, but
well, but I think there's I think that outspokenness, like I really try not to fall in the trap of like saying, oh, this generation, that generation, whatever. Like we all have our own challenges, and I don't want to be that curmudgeon. Um, but I think that one of the things you see now, and you might have the same reaction sometimes, is like you see. You see things in the news where somebody gets outed for being like a mean boss,
Mhm.
um and, and like I think in the Navy and in the law you get much exposure to that, but then I think somebody said like, but like is it necessarily a bad thing that people who are not treating their employees like human beings, like not being a dictator, is that really a bad thing? And I think that, I guess it's kind of like, I don't. It's hard to say that it is a bad thing, but I think that there's also a part of like, you can change jobs, but I think that people should learn how to treat people more decently, in the workplace, especially in the workplace, because we spend so much time there.
Yeah, yeah, and again, it's probably a positive, right? They're holding
Yeah,
people to a higher standard. Like
yeah,
I want to be treated humanely, and you want to be treated humanely. So, like, stop being a jerk. Like
right,
that. When I see that, kind of dynamic in kind of this generation or my daughter's generation, I'm hopeful. Like that's a good thing. I
yeah,
guess I worry sometimes that they're missing like the balance or like the sense of humor to it. I mean, like you can't be indignant all the time.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it'd be a very, very long life if you're indignant all the time.
yeah,
So balancing that like sense of fairness with, a little bit of a sense of humor or understanding of, okay, I got a mean boss. Like I can get through this
yeah,
situation.
yeah.
Um, that's that's the balance I hope they strike.
Yeah, and maybe also just kind of realizing that sometimes there's, I guess it could be what exactly is mean. Like I think sometimes like in certain environments require different things, and certain times of the workday, and like being yelled at during if you're in combat and somebody's yelling at you, yeah, sorry, like you're in combat. But if
Yeah.
if you still get abused during just regular meetings or whatever, then obviously it's a different case. So I think to me that's one thing. Like my daughter had an inspection that she works at an ice cream shop, and so the inspector came, and like her boss, she was telling us about how her boss was like, anxious, and I think he cursed, not at her, but just like cursed, but like she kind of got it. She understood that, yeah, this is a high stress moment. So like,
Ice cream
so
shop, yeah, controversy,
yeah,
conflict.
well, I mean, the inspector shows up and you shut down the ice cream shop. She
Yeah,
doesn't have a job either.
yeah.
But I think it was so yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I don't. I think when and one of the other things I find that the kids are they're more. I think they're more. I say more sophisticated, but like when I took my daughter and a couple of kids down to South Carolina for a pilot trip to South Carolina, a test trip, I noticed that the interaction between the boys and girls was different than I think it would have been for our generation. It was more like on a level playing field, and I think what I see is like even like we see with like with the WNBA is that there's more of an ability and a capacity. And like look, we grew up in a male dominated world in a lot of respects, and it's
Hmm.
changed since like we were JOs on Bunker Hill.
Hmm.
um but there's more of a perception of people as like on a level playing field, um
Yeah,
and just gender being just one little facet that makes things different versus like the defining difference.
yeah. I saw that recently too when we were at Syracuse for the graduation, and my daughter lives in a crummy old apartment with five girls, and right next to them is another crummy old apartment with five boys, and just what you described. Like there was um, a connection between those two apartments where they watched out for each other and they kind of went to each other's parties and helped each other when issues came up or someone needed a place to crash. They were just it seemed much more the way it should be, like collaborative and friendly, as opposed to when we were growing up, where it was definitely more you know I don't know, gender confrontational somehow. I don't know.
It was. I feel like there was more. Like for me, and I had two brothers and no sisters, but it always felt like that the gender was a huge barrier. Like it was like they're aliens, and like you
Hmm.
don't understand them, and
Hmm.
there's only like one way of approaching them. Or I so yeah. So I think it's definitely better. So that definitely gives me hope. Um, how is as Susie does she feel like does she feel like a Connecticuter? What is a person from Connecticut? What do you call that?
I guess we're Yankees, Connecticut Yankees.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Like like I'm
Yeah,
a
I
New
think that's what we would
Yorker.
say. We wouldn't say Connecticuter.
That does not sound. That sounds way
Doesn't
too
sound right.
awkward.
Yeah, like I said, I think she's put down roots here too, and she has her community and her friends and all that. She's an amazing person in that she keeps touch with like her Washington friends, and she keeps touch with our Kansas City friends, and she keeps touch with our Japanese friends. And
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
she's like a really good at not letting those relationships slip, even with distance. So
Yeah.
she still does all that.
So, what is an ideal day for you guys? Like an ideal weekend day? What would you do?
Wow. So man, you're gonna laugh. So I've been a little bit pampering myself since I retired.
Hmm.
So an ideal day starts in a cold tub. So I do that.
Uh,
I'm a cold plunge guy. So I do
nice.
that. Cup of coffee and the newspaper.
Uh,
And newspaper means old school paper newspaper because
uh,
I love it.
yeah.
That's a morning for me. A cup of coffee and a newspaper. Same for Suze. She doesn't do the cold tub, and she does Wordle instead of the newspaper, but the
Uh,
coffee's the same. So
uh,
we're a little bit like an old couple where we're sitting there reading the paper and drinking our coffee with Wordle, and that's a benefit of being retired, right? We don't have to rush out of the house.
yeah.
Um, I have a gym in the basement, so like COVID kind of sparked a kind of a revive of my interest in fitness. So I put like this great gym in the basement, so I can just go down there and work out as opposed to go somewhere.
Uh,
Um, and then by 9, 10 o'clock I'm up on the computer working on the foundation stuff, which
uh,
some of it's just like any other work. It's admin and accounting and all that stuff, but some of it's fun, creative. um, the uh, the kids just got home, so that becomes its own thing of like, what are we doing with them, how are we feeding them, where are we going. But I'd say we're pretty much homebodies. Like we do a lot of gardening, a lot of stuff around the house. We have a big old home, which you can kind of see behind me,
uh,
that always needs work. Something's always broken. So I do a lot of work on the house.
And you should be pretty handy, I imagine, after 20 years of renovating apartments.
I'm getting handier, although I can see where my work starts and where the contractor work starts. So as we pay more contractors, it's definitely improved. But
Uh,
yeah, for years we were the ones scraping the wallpaper and hanging the cabinets.
wow.
But yeah, as I described that day, it sounds kind of boring, but
But if you had visitors and you were going to take them out and about, what would you do?
hiking. I like to hike. So like
Uh,
when we had Carolyn here from Tanzania, we went up to the White Mountains. I love going up to the White Mountains. That's like a great spot for me. Um, it's a lot of hiking, a lot of outdoor stuff. We have a pickleball court in our backyard, so we
uh,
play a lot of pickleball here.
uh,
Our house is also, I should mention, like multi generational. So it's never quiet here. I don't know how I got like quiet for a little bit to do this podcast, but my parents live on that side of the
yeah,
house.
I saw you. I saw somebody come out.
Yeah, that
Your
was my
father.
dad. And I kind of creeping in the background.
Yeah.
So my dad and mom live over there, and then we have two younger adults who live with us as well on this side.
Uh,
So it's kind of a mishmash, and then our three kids are home, so it's a busy place usually.
that's good. That's good. It's funny. I hear people like. I feel like no matter who I talk to, like hiking is one of those things that people mention as something that they like to do.
Yeah, you ever get out and do it?
I no, no, but what I'll say is one, like to get out of the city, and like, this is one of my observations.
Yeah,
Thinking about the city and what makes it different is that the city has a lot to offer,
yeah,
but what makes it impenetrable for people to come in also makes it hard for people to get out. And I
get
think
out.
that's
Yeah,
one of the things that makes New York. I think I don't know if I'd say I think more insular and a little more disconnected from the rest of the country. Like when I've sit here and watched news and politics and wonder why a city that really has people from all over the country as well as the world might seem disconnected or not relating to other people what you see in the news. It's
that's because
because
the
it's
parking's
hard to get out.
$75 a day, and the bridges are like 40
Yeah,
bucks to get in there. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No,
And the traffic that's hard for people to get into is the traffic that we have to suffer to get out. So it's
yeah,
like, yeah, it would be nice to go hiking on Bear Mountain, but do we want to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours to get there?
yeah.
Like, no. But we do have a park nearby, and Christy and I like, I think each week we're trying to kind of like just go for a walk and,
I think New Yorkers, just by the nature of your city, walk more than people realize. Like everybody in New York is pretty fit, just because you have to cover so many blocks to get
yeah,
from here to there.
yeah. So
Whenever I go to the city, I always crank up the mileage as well as
yeah. Well, I mean, and that's true, and like from like and in that respect, yeah, we do get our walking, but I think that the hiking of what you're talking about is definitely more relaxing than
all right.
the walk that we get.
I'm going to give you your escape from New York plan, Mike. Get on a train and just get to me, because you can get the train right out of Penn Station, right up here, and I'll pick you up and we'll go up to the Whites. You'll love it. And the other thing I'd say, the White Mountains have this amazing. Have you ever heard of the huts, the AMC
No.
huts? Oh my gosh, this is the way to get if you want to get into hiking.
Uh,
Get on the AMC website, Appalachian Mountain Club website.
uh,
They have a series of huts all throughout the mountains, and you book them for a night, and they give you dinner, a place to sleep, so you don't have to sleep like out in the wild, but it's like a
uh,
bunk room, and they give you breakfast in the morning.
uh,
So with that, you can kind of hike from hut to hut, and you go
uh,
to these places that you wouldn't normally probably be able to get to, and you
uh,
don't have to carry like all that stuff.
uh, uh,
So that's a great like way. That's how we got into hiking as a family.
is that right? So when you go hiking, do you go out for like a couple of days or a week, or what do you do?
Yeah, I generally like a couple days. If I can go hut to hut, that's like my favorite, because like I said, all you got to carry is your water and your snacks,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get your food. And the huts are kind of their own little thing. Like they are, it'd be a great American Tributaries broadcast, by the way, up from the huts, because there's people from all over the world up there.
Oh yeah.
And they're typically run by these college kids who are usually like environmental degree people, and
Uh-huh.
they make great food and bread, and you're up, you're just way away from the cell phone towers. It's
Uh-huh.
beautiful.
Oh wow. What is it that you think in hiking and being out in nature is so restorative?
Um, I guess I like the quiet of it first. Like you always notice when you come back from a hike, you always notice how loud like our world just is, just ambiently, like cars and air conditioners running all the time. So I love the quiet of it. Um, and it's a little bit monotonous, and there's something to like picking your feet up and putting them down and moving around that kind of is good for the brain.
Yeah, I went for I have my attempts at exercise are very sporadic and never last long enough. But I was out for a bike ride this morning,
Mm,
and it got me thinking about how like a lot of times like even like my daughter, especially, like she has to have headphones on to like when she goes out. Like she can't leave without her headphones because you need
mhm.
music. And I think that I don't know if it says something about like society, but it's like in some respects, like people are afraid to be alone, or maybe they're already lonely and not being stimulated makes them feel even more lonely. I don't know what it is, or
Yeah,
and I saw that I say my daughter is lonely, but there's something about being alone with your thoughts that can be maybe boring, but also lets you kind of mull things over actively and ponder and think and I
yeah.
don't know, self
Yeah, I was just
reflection.
listening to John Haidt. He said that this generation is like the most connected, but the most lonely. Like how can those two things be true? But it's happening like right in front of us. We all see it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I find myself like I was always a good reader growing up, and just because of I think scrolling and the connectivity and the always connected, it's almost hard for me to read now because you it's like a different muscle to like sit and just contemplate and read as opposed to scrolling, which I think is a little bit more I don't know, dopamine hits, right?
Yeah.
I think hiking is the same way. It's not a you don't instantly feel good when you hike,
Mm.
but if you hike long enough and far enough, it helps.
Yeah. What do you like reading the newspaper?
What do I
Reading an
like
old
read?
school print newspaper
So it's
versus
you're gonna laugh because it's probably typical makes Wall Street Journal every day, uh, but New York Times cover to
uh,
cover on Sunday
uh,
because
and
you got to get both.
what is it that you like about reading that experience of reading the paper? I have my own answer to this, but like, what is it that you think is
Um,
pleasurable to you?
so it's a little bit like I'm sometimes in awe of how people can make arguments. Like some of the great writers in the Times and the Journal, like they're just um, the way they can synthesize what's going on and present it in a meaningful way is just like a is impressive for me to read and kind of experience. And that's why I like reading the
Hmm.
paper those two papers in particular because they have just great writers.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and then the other thing is just being able to be in touch with what's going on and kind of understanding. Like the journal, especially, I think if you don't understand the business world, you probably don't understand a lot about what's going on in the world because there's a lot there.
Right.
Um, so,
And you had made it the point of saying like you like reading the actual printed paper of it. So is there
oh
something that versus like going online? So what do you see as the difference in your experience of consuming news?
yeah, it's a good question. Partly it's tactile, right? Like I just like it. Like I like having it open. Um, I'm not limited to just the small screen, so I can see all the headlines and kind of choose where I want to go, as opposed to getting it force fed to me through an algorithm. Those are probably the big ones. I
Yeah.
mean, I understand the paper itself is an algorithm, meaning it was curated and put together, but somehow I can control my destiny in it a little bit more than you know Instagram or Facebook feeding me stuff.
Yeah.
How about you? Why the paper as opposed to the feeds?
Well, I think I think similar to what you're saying, but I think because you're algorithm free, you're not going to be forced to read. Like if you read one article that outrages you, then it's going to elevate another article that's like similar.
Yeah,
And I don't, and I think then if you get on Facebook and like if you can consume your news like by reading articles on Facebook, then you're going to be fed like the same 7-10 articles that outrage you. Whereas if you're getting your news primarily from a print, you might read an article and get outraged, but then you're going to go to the art section,
yeah.
or then you're going to read an article about something in a different region, or you're going to read about sports, or you're going to read about weather. And so I think it forces you to not be outraged and to be more holistic in your understanding of the world. I mean, obviously, newspapers have been printed probably forever to outrage you, but I
Mhm.
think that the impact of the outrage is less when you're reading print versus when you're consuming it digitally.
Yeah, I agree. I also get like when I do get my feed from the news, I get kind of bored with it. Like I do use Flipboard, which is a like an app, right? And I'll flip through there, and after a while, you can see the algorithm working, and you can see that you're getting the same article and different versions of it, over and over again. And I get like turned off by that, so I end up kind of going back to the paper.
Yeah.
But you can see how if you were incensed by that and you were getting more incensed, I mean, man, it is a vicious, you know, what do they call that? Like vicious cycle there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even like if you had something that says, oh, we're going to give you different viewpoints, sometimes it's like, well, I don't want to read the outrage on the left and then outrage on the right. That's not really helpful either.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, exactly.
you just gave me the two extreme voices. I want to hear about the nuance in the middle.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I also like long form stuff a little bit more than most. Like I love the Atlantic. I think that's a really, they'll take it, they'll go a little deeper on some issues.
yeah.
I think some issues require that. You can't do it in a tweet, right? You
Yeah.
need
Right.
now I can
I've
hear it. Yeah.
I don't know if you're hearing it now, but the construction that has been outside my window is like feels like it's actually in my apartment now. So
I can hear it.
I'm gonna apologize in case we have to re-record this, but I hope we don't. I haven't seen it registering on the visual
No,
thing
I
that
haven't heard it at
audio.
all until that
Okay,
one.
good.
And you can't re-record this. This is like my best stuff. I'm like,
Yeah, no, it's
I
been
don't have more material for you.
well, it's been spectacular, and we probably should wrap up. But you've already kind of answered this. But is there anything else you could add to about like what gives you hope at the end of the day?
Yeah, I just left that graduation at Syracuse feeling really kind of invigorated for that generation. Like they're amazing, they're smart, they're dedicated, they're idealistic, they're opinionated, but they're gonna do what they say. They're gonna try to make this place better, which I think is great. And I think it's our job, to coach them and allow that to happen, which is going to be challenging for us because there is a part of me that's a curmudgeon and wants to tell them, no, you'll never get there, and like,
Yeah.
stop, do that, go get a job.
Well, I think that generationally, the other part of it is like, like I think, as you're living, we haven't, we're not in, this isn't the final act. Like, even if you're our age, we're not done. Like, our lifespans are a lot longer. So I think to me, the hope is also like, we still have our part to play. Like, there are problems. Every generation creates its own problems. We've
Mhm.
created ours, but we're still active participants in this. And in some respects, I think the hope could almost be like, there are people who are 50, 60, 70 who are vested in improving things, and you've got this younger generation who does feel more empowered and is more interconnected than ever before. And maybe I would venture to say that it's not far-fetched to say that the best is yet to come. Are there problems? Sure. Are there serious problems? Sure. But there's always been that, and we got to believe that things can get better and that we have a part to play in that.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that the other thing they have going for them, and hopefully us too, is technology, right? Like I do think there's a lot of hope in AI and fusion and things like that are kind of like just there. That will play a big part in the story to come.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right. Well, Pat, thanks so much for doing this. It's been such a pleasure. I'm glad we've had this excuse to have a prolonged chat.
Yeah, yeah. I want an evening version of this where we have beers too instead of coffee.
Yeah,
But yes,
that would be
it's fun.
great.
Thanks, Mike.
So, all right. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you to all the viewers and listeners out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right. Thanks so much, Pat.
Thanks, everybody.